from Case Western. Our first organization that's going to be speaking today in our Metadata Mini-Grant lightning poster session is Case Western University. And we're going to be hearing from Stephanie Becker and Kumer. And I'm going to go ahead and mute my mic so you can start sharing your screen. You should be able to, or just start going.
How's that? Can everyone see that? Okay. I have like two monitors and it's always very confusing. Okay, hi, I'm Stephanie Becker and I'll be presenting with my coworker Ann Kumer. Yeah, so we did a project for the Metadata Mini-Grant. We titled it Remediating Legacy Mods Records in the Cleveland Playhouse Production Photographs Collection. So a little bit of background on this collection. In 2018, we did a major repository migration. And then afterwards, we spent many months coming up with a methodology for digital collections metadata. And so looking at this collection, specifically the Cleveland Playhouse production photographs, we have photographs that were digitized and ingested before the migration. We have a hybrid of photographs digitized prior to the migration, but ingested afterwards. And then we have photographs that were digitized and ingested after the migration. And so this collection in and of itself actually became a really useful collection for us in just developing all these new workflows for our new repository. And the reason why this kind of content history is important for our grant project is because each of these three scenarios adheres to a different set of metadata standards. And that makes searching across the collection really difficult. So we wanted to improve that search functionality, but we also recognize that doing this project would have a larger impact for us as well. So alongside of that search functionality, we recognized that standardizing our metadata also increases the usability or reusability of our collections. It sets consistent expectations with patrons on the quality and usability of our data, which is important for building trust with our campus community and partners. Standardizing data makes migrating or updating in the future a lot easier, especially as standards change and systems change over time. And the process also allowed us to develop and implement sustainable metadata and ingest workflows for all of our repository collections. So this collection is really, we've used it as a use case for a number of different workflows. And so this is the latest kind of one, is how do we remediate metadata and how do we harvest into DPLA? So to start off, the first thing we did was assess this collection and identify the variations among our different mods records. So this is just a small screenshot of the spreadsheet that Anne so wonderfully created to track the variations. So in column A is the mods field name, and then column B is our current standard, what we use to ingest new collections. So where it says Islandora mods, this is essentially what we spent a good amount of time creating as the way that we want all of our records to look. And then we identified essentially 5 various structures across the collection. So if you take a look, I know it's like hard to see, awkward in a screenshot, but if you take a look at it, you'll notice that sometimes there's major variations, sometimes there's very, very slight variations, but those do actually make a difference. And so we wanted to change that. So once we identified all those structures, we have a repository vendor that we partner with, Discovery Garden, and we worked with them to write a script that would transform each of the 5 structures into our current standard, and then apply that script to the collection. So I'm going to hand it off to Anne now.
Thanks, Stephanie. After identifying all of the different structures of metadata, we needed to look at the information stored in each field and also the variations in use. Since the collection is arranged primarily by date, the folders correspond with season years, and the various ingests and migrations happen more or less chronologically in the collection. This made it much easier to look at sample records for each structure, and then following the same model we used to create the structure sheet, this is a remediation sheet. So it notes things like if a field isn't used in one structure, but it's used in another, any mapping instructions that might need to happen where data needs to be moved from one field into another, anything that needs deleting, and probably most relevant to the remediation process, anything that needs to be added. There are a couple of standardized fields of information that we've added since in like recent metadata structures. These include things like subject terminology, the object type, the local ID field, which now has an archive space collection number for the Cleveland Playhouse. So it can be tracked back to its original archive record as well. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then Stephanie made this sheet that kind of combines all of the mapping into like a master mapping sheet. So it has the ODN field, the ODN mapping, the island door field, the Dublin core, and the mods field. So everything's in one place. All three of these sheets we think that we can reuse for future DPLA deposits and to help with any sort of internal legacy metadata cleanup efforts. Next slide. This is what the finished object looks like in DPLA. We're really happy with how it turned out. As per ODN and DPLA specs, the collection name includes the season date. When a user clicks on the handle URL, they get taken to the repository, which is in the next slide. And so within our repository, the object looks like this. It's almost identical to the DPLA record, which makes it's just a more consistent experience for the researcher. The only additional information that tends to be included in this record is some more detailed creator information, which is often the photographer or the studio who took the picture. And then in addition to the season date, many of these objects have a more specified date range, which is typically when the photograph was taken in like a week's time over, production date run or something. Next slide. And so next, what we're planning to do is apply this workflow to seasons 1916 to 1979 of the Cleveland Playhouse. That's about 5,500 images, and we would like to harvest those into DPLA as well. Just on the tail end of that, we think we can apply the same workflow to the Cleveland Playhouse programs, which is a complementary collection. They're often requested in tandem with the production photographs by theater historians. We just finished the metadata for that, I think about 2 weeks ago, and the digitization is just about wrapped up too. So that number is about 1,200 programs and 30,000 pages. And then following that, we hope to apply these same methods to other collections within our library and repository. Next. So thank you. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Anne. Your slides are always so engaging. Thank you. And thank you for including those workflows too. That was really great. We've got a couple more minutes actually left for questions. While we're waiting for those to come into the chat, maybe could you talk a little bit about why you chose this specific collection for this project?
Do you want to answer? Do you want me to?
Sure. In some ways it was easy because a lot of the metadata is very consistent. It's a high use collection. It has a high value for local history. It's very complete too. It spans many, many decades. So we have a variety of like interest and types of material to draw from. It has quite a few complementary collections within the larger Cleveland Playhouse. So that it tends to, you can kind of splinter off into other directions there. And then it was ingested over like 5 different types of ingests over a period of time, and they were all very consistent ingests. So it was a bit easier to kind of wrangle the metadata with this collection, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I'll also just add that, yeah, the slide that I had in the beginning about the kind of 3 different timeframes that things happened, that for me was a huge part of it, of picking this collection, just because it means that because there's so much variation, it's actually very representative of a lot of what's happening in the repository and other collections. And so it presented a really big opportunity for us to just really focus in on these photographs and working with these images. And then kind of, this is like our next step, is talking about how do we start thinking about this in terms of other collections and using those collections. So
Yeah, awesome. I love to see a collection or process get scaled up. So it's great to see that happening. All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie and Ann.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to Cleveland State. Marsha Miles is going to be speaking about their Metadata Mini-Grant project. Oh, that is a specific photographer's collection. Marsha, we are ready when you are.
Thank you. You should be seeing my slides. Great. Okay. Hi, I'm Marsha Miles. I'm the Assistant Director for Collections and Resource Management at Cleveland State. We submitted a proposal to create a digital collection for a Cleveland photographer. And William Wynn was 98 at the time that we submitted our proposal. And our collections included work from his time as a professional photographer for the Plain Dealer, and personally appealing artistic photographs that he had taken. He'd made an earlier donation to John Carroll University, who we had invited to partner with Cleveland Memory so that they could also include their Wynn holdings. Unfortunately, at the time, they were not able to propose their own grant project, and they didn't have the staffing to work on the collection. Our project focused on creating the metadata records for Wynn's photographs, which were being digitized prior to the beginning of the grant timeline. So once the metadata records were created, the images were uploaded to Cleveland Memory. Since we had created a new project, we just needed to add some fields that aren't typically in our standard template, for the right statements and the corresponding URIs, which sounds really simple, and we thought it would be, but we did face some challenges. We struggled with some unforeseen copyright issues. It wasn't clear if we had the rights to upload the majority of his collection. We couldn't confidently say that the photographer held the rights to his work when he was working for the Plain Dealer. And surprisingly to us, most of the collection was comprised of that work that he had done for the paper. So we were not aware of that at the time. We contacted the Plain Dealer for permission, of course, but they've outsourced their image rights to a vendor, which made it really tricky, and getting a hold of the vendor for permission proved very difficult. So, we talked about it. My director didn't feel confident relying on fair use due to the vendor situation. We just weren't sure. So we partnered with John Carroll in hopes that their collection would be clear on rights. We offered to digitize and catalog their images for inclusion in the project, and surprisingly found quite a bit of duplication between our collections. So neither institutions was prepared for that. We thought we had very distinct collections of his work. So we were very afraid we would not be able to reach the 250 minimum images required by the grant project. So we requested and were given approval by the State Library to expand it to include another photographer, Jenny Jones. The collection of her work that we have represents the bulk of her career as an architectural and commercial photographer. And photographic artist and essayist. She gave us permission to include her work in Cleveland Memory and was very excited about the potential increased exposure through DPLA. We were planning on focusing on the already digitized images that we had of her work, and particularly her industrial construction photographs. We plan on calling the combined project Focus on Cleveland. So that was our plan at the time. Another challenge we faced was working during the pandemic. The digitization work was outside the scope of our grant proposal, and we had planned on doing that prior to the start of cataloging. And then the library was only open to a few essential staff members. Scanning could only be done one afternoon a week. So that slowed things down. But despite that, we were able to stay ahead of the cataloger as the project progressed. And then cataloging and batch uploading to Content EM was done remotely. So that was all handled virtually. You didn't have to be in the building for that. So even though we did get permission to expand the project between our collection and John Carroll's collection, we're able to digitize and catalog a total of 257 photographs from the collections. Even though we didn't need to expand the project to include Jenny Jones's work, we are hoping to create a separate digital collection in the near future. So that is on our list of things to do. Sadly, Bill Wynn passed away in April of 2021, and he was 99. So he did not get to see the completed project, but his family is very grateful for the work that we've done to preserve and share his work. So they were very pleased with the finished project. So some of the benefits included, we, of course, were very excited for the opportunity to expand Cleveland Memories collections and reach. We've wanted to work on this collection for some time, but we just didn't have the staff to devote to describing the images. We also wanted to get involved in the Ohio Digital Network and DPLA for several years. And, it was always, oddly enough, the copyright question that always comes up with our collections that was kind of holding us back. So I'm glad we were able to find a way to work around that in this instance. We've also had several Cleveland Memory Project partners signing permission letters to include their work in DPLA through the Ohio Digital Network. So that's pretty exciting too. And so just want to say thanks to the State Library and of course, John Carroll University for making the project a success. Does anyone have any questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marsha. And I'm so glad that you were able to get that work started with Mr. Wynn before he passed. And sorry to hear about that, but I'm sure his family is just thrilled to see it all, come to fruition. That's wonderful. While we're waiting to see if any questions do come in or people jotting down your email address there, do you have any, with the luxury of hindsight, do you have any advice that you would give to folks starting out on a project like this regarding the copyrights and working through that process of the right statements and copyright clearance?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's much easier if you know upfront what you're dealing with. I think part of the reason that we found ourselves in the situation of not being as clear about what rights we had regarding that collection was because we were off-site at the time that we were working on the proposal. So we couldn't actually dig into that collection and verify that when we received the collection and the photographer gave us the impression that it contained, more of his artistic work, that, we could have looked and seen for sure, what do we actually have in that collection? And I think, going forward, of course, we can plan better as far as, who has the rights to this donation and can they grant that to us? And because a lot of our work is from photojournalists, it is tricky. Is it a work for hire? Is it, are the rights with the newspaper? So that makes it a little trickier too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, as much as we plan, nobody can plan for a pandemic and the obstacles and the hurdles that brings. So it's great to see, even though I'm sure it was frustrating for you, and I'm sorry about that. It was great to see, how you could kind of pivot and really adjust the scope of your project to be able to feature another photographer, even an entirely other, new photographer or new to the collection photographer. So thank you so much, Marsha. And we'll go ahead and oh yeah, sorry, we do have a comment from Angela, a great example of how to work through copyright issues. And kudos to you for persisting through the process. And I echo that too, Angela. And I'm sure we all can empathize with your pain a little bit there.
Thank you. And I do want to say too that just the support from the State Library was was so helpful, because when you hit these roadblocks, you're like, oh no, what now? I really don't want to have to, abandon this project and return all the money. So thank you for that.
Nobody wants that. We want everybody to keep the money. Please keep the money. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and go up next is move on to community library and Margaret Arnold from community library. Margaret, I think that you are, yep, I think I see you there. Do you have a screen that you'd like to share with us? Let's see, we might be having some technical issues here. Well, let's go ahead and while we are letting Margaret get set up, let's go ahead and we'll just bump everybody up a little bit. And Margaret, if you could send us a message and let us know when you're ready, we'll go ahead and bump yours next. So Virginia Dressler and Bryan Kvet are here to speak for the Kent Historical Society and Museum and their Metadata Mini-Grant project. Are you ready, Ginny and Bryan?
So I am having trouble sharing my screen.
Oh, let's see.
I don't
Do
know
you
if
see the option down at the bottom?
Yep, it's
Okay.
there. It's just, yeah, it's not. So I don't know if it's permissions thing.
Hmm.
And you can skip us as well by.
Let me see if I can.
It should be, you should be okay. I've got, all participants have the ability to share screen. So in terms of software permissions, I think we're okay. So unless it's your computer permissions with like,
Let me
not sure.
try and it's a Google slide. So I'm going to try and download it as a PowerPoint. So maybe give me a moment.
Okay, we can go ahead then and no problem at all. We'll just circle everybody around and we'll hear from Casey McCarty, Angela O'Neill, and Nicole Sutton, both from the King Arts Complex. Excuse me, I've been speaking so much today. King Arts Complex and the Columbus Metropolitan Library to speak about their Metadata Mini-Grant project.
Thanks, Jen. I'm going to start us off, but Nicole is going to screen share for me. So I'll give her a moment to cross your fingers and get the screen share to work.
I'm only seeing desktop as an option. Usually it shows me my applications and I could just choose PowerPoint.
I noticed that same issue earlier today when I went to screen share. So I'm not sure if that's a software update that Zoom has pushed out on us, but let's move. I know.
Love
I know.
those. Thanks, Zoom.
right in the middle of the day. You
Speaking
can
of
have
changing
your
the direction of your project midstream.
Okay, let me try to make it Nicole. Nicole, you're looking to screen share. Let me see what happens if I can make you a co-host, and that should give you ultimate permissions. Please just don't shut down the whole thing if you could. Please.
Okay,
Thanks.
I'll try to refrain.
Please, thank you.
It still did not change the options.
Oh dear.
Well, let me see what it looks like. You might just see like my taskbar at the bottom, but maybe I can hide that and we can just make PowerPoint full screen. But then I might not be able to see the Zoom, I guess. I mean, we can always do the talk without
I was
the
about to say we can just talk.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and go with that. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. If you can just give us a quick summary of your experience and what you went through.
And
Thank
you all
you.
can see the collections on DPLA
True.
now. So maybe while we're talking, just go look around. Encourage you to do that. So I'm going to start us off. We're tag teaming today with myself and Nicole, and Casey is here as well to answer questions. I wanted to give a little bit of background about how this grant came about and why you're talking to King Arts and Columbus Metropolitan Library. So we actually met Casey a few years ago now, before the pandemic, which feels like about 500 years ago. But we met and we had heard that King Arts had a photograph collection and Casey had done some scanning on it. So we went over to take a look and we were just amazed at how wonderful this collection is. We believe it's the photo morgue for the old Columbus Call-in Post, which is now a defunct paper and separate from the Cleveland Call-in Post. So we had our own little copyright stuff to work through there. And just a wonderful collection of Columbus's primarily Black community in the 60s and 70s. Most of the materials had some level of description, although sometimes it's pretty sketchy, I'll say. And so we wanted to be able to work on this collection and add it to our own digital collection, My History. So we started doing that before the pandemic. It was going really slowly. We had about 800, maybe 1,000 images online. And one of the big challenges that we were having was we were doing some processing and sorting work as we went. So we were rehousing the photographs as well as putting them in chronological order and then scanning them. And so that was a pretty lengthy process. So we were really excited when the grant opportunity came up to be able to outsource the scanning, which was the main component of our project. And this is where I turn it over to Nicole.
Yeah, so I'll actually kind of start with the process since Angela gave us that great lead into it. So basically our process was very similar to how we had done it before. We would go to King Arts, we would take a batch of photos. They're currently stored in filing cabinets there at the King Arts complex. So we would visit, take boxes with us, take some files with us. We'd come back to the library and we would rehouse them because right now they are in acidic folders. So we're rehousing them into file folders, putting them into chronological order, like Angela said, and then labeling them with an identifier on the back and pencil. And then we would send those off to our outside vendor to be scanned once that process was finished. Keepsake Solutions was our scanning vendor, and they scanned them for us, and then we got them back. And at that point, that's when we had our metadata specialist that we were able to hire with the grant money to go through and add our metadata. And then our team members here in local history and genealogy at the library went through and did quality control and set up all the mapping for the harvest to DPLA. And like Angela said, we had about 1,000 images from the beginning, and then the grant added enabled us to add about 2,500 more images. So for a total of, let me get the total number of 3,562 images were able to be harvested to DPLA thanks to this grant. So we were very fortunate. And I also wanted to give a little bit of background about the King Arts Complex. This photo morgue from the Columbus Call-in Post. Like Angela said, the Cleveland Call-in Post had started first, and then Amos Lynch wanted to bring a version of that to Columbus, and he actually fought pretty hard to bring a version of that to Columbus. And again, it's one of the Black newspapers that was here in Columbus. It started in 1962 and continued up to 1995. And then after that, Amos Lynch started his Columbus Post after that in 1996. But the newspaper really served as a community newspaper for the Black community of Columbus, and really took a look at stories that some of the bigger newspapers like the Dispatch and other newspapers wouldn't have covered. So looking at the schools, looking at the local businesses, the social groups. We have some wonderful photographs of organizations like the Kvetettes and the Merrymakers and the Twilight Strollers. And also the newspaper gave a different perspective on a lot of events that were also covered in other newspapers, but gave completely different perspectives. We've had the privilege of seeing some comparisons of how the same event was covered and how different they were told, those stories were told. And I also want to give a plug, because anytime I'm given the opportunity to talk about this, we only have microfilm starting in 1972. And if you remember, I said the newspaper started in 1962. So if you know where anyone has copies of the physical newspaper, because again, we don't think microfilm even exists for the first decade of the newspaper. So if you know anyone who might have copies of the newspaper, let us know, because that would be really helpful for creating metadata for all of the images for that first decade, because right now we're going through the very slow process of trying to do the research research and identify people, but it would really help tremendously if we had access to those earlier newspapers. So they exist and you know where they might be, let us know at Columbus Metropolitan Library. We would be very grateful. And then I'll pass it back to Angela to just kind of talk about what this looks like for the future, how this impacted the overall process for being able to digitize this photo more.
Yeah, just to add a couple of things that went well for us were, in spite of the pandemic, we managed to get through the project because our staff were able to work from home. By that point, we had the first round of photos scanned. So we had a big cache of images basically that needed metadata. So we got very lucky that we had those back in the first round. And then our vendor was totally open to taking a second batch of photos in the middle of the pandemic to keep it going. So that was very fortunate turn of events for us. So we were lucky to be able to get it going. We estimate, I think that we've done, I don't think we're through one file cabinet yet, so less than 1/6 of this collection has been digitized at this point, to give you a sense of the scope of it. So we're really expecting this to be a long-term partnership that we have with King Arts, and hopefully Casey won't get too annoyed with us coming over to visit every now and then and swap out photographs. But we've already had some great responses from our library customers and from King Arts customers who have talked about just how great it is to have these photos available for the community. So we're very excited about it and looking forward to continuing on. And if there are any questions or anything, we're happy to answer them. Sorry you didn't get to see the PowerPoint. It had some very pretty pictures in it, but you can see
I'm sorry
them
too.
you can see them on DPLA, which is all that really matters.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we can get the link for that. And as somebody mentioned earlier, you know, if you want to send the slides along, we can share them certainly. As a group, we can share everybody's slides together. Thank you for your flexibility. Apologies
Happy
for the
to.
technical problems, but there's nothing we love more than a partnership, whether or not there are slides involved, right? So
Right.
that's the true heart of of this the point of this presentations and this work that we're all doing. So I'm glad that they can't take that from us, is what I'm trying to say, no matter how many times they update the software. So we're going to go next. Thank you so much, Casey, Nicole, and Angela. Next, we're going to try Kent Historical Society again. Ginny and Bryan are going to speak about the work that they've been doing with Kent Historical Society. And hello, like we see the slides. What a beautiful sight. Thank you.
All right. Did I remember to unmute myself? I did.
You did. Yes.
Okay. I'm like, there's all the things. Okay, thanks, Jen. I'm Virginia Dressler. I'm the digital projects librarian from Kent State, but I'm here today to talk to you as a volunteer from Kent Historical Society. And I'm here with my colleague, Bryan. Would you like to introduce yourself, Bryan?
Sure. I'm Bryan Kvet. I am an adjunct librarian at Kent State. And then I also serve as the sort of the metadata assistant or collector over the last few months of this project.
Awesome. So I will start and then with an overview, and then we'll switch back to Bryan to talk about kind of more the nuts and bolts. So the Oral History Project at Kent Historical Society started in the early 1980s. It's an interesting collection, as I think many oral histories collections are. They really have a lot of kind of personal, social, cultural, and economic information that's not typically available in public records or other historical materials. We've got just over 250 recorded interviews with local Kent residents. Sometimes this overlaps with some of the oral history content we have at the university with faculty members as well, but it's definitely a little bit more kind of local. Topics of this collection include May 4, 1970 with the National Guard, major fires in the town, my personal favorite 1970s music scene in Kent, Ohio, Devo, Chrissy Hine, the Erie Railroad, and downtown development. The majority of this collection has been audio, originally reel-to-reel, audio cassettes, and then more recently, born digital audio files. But we've also got a handful of video, I think primarily from the last 5 to 8 years. They've given this as an option for people coming in wanting to do the oral histories. So we've included those as well. I started volunteering with the Historical Society in 2015. So we really started the kind of transformation from the physical audio into digital. It's primarily been up until this point, working with interns from the School of Information at Kent State. We modeled the metadata for this project by and large from the Kent State May 4 oral history digital collection. The volunteer and past president who created the collection at Kent Historical Society had also created our May 4 oral history collection. So there's kind of some fun tidbits between having kind of the same person create both of these projects. We use some local controlled vocabularies for subject headings, in addition to LC, which Bryan will talk about here in just a moment. We've also added some fields for occupation and time periods discussed throughout the interviews. I've got a link up to our Ohio Memory digital collection. There's also Kent Tribune digital newspaper and some other text content, but our highest numbers are definitely this oral history collection. Huge thank you to LSTA for this metadata mini grant. This really, I think, got us to the finish line. I was talking with the director last week, and without this grant, I don't know when we would have been able to finish because we had depended so much on interns from the iSchool that they don't require the internship anymore, and so few folks are local anymore. I just don't know that we would have gotten there. So huge thank you. This allowed us to hire Bryan, who's been fantastic. He'll talk about his work creating metadata records for just under 100 items. We also did a little cleanup on previously uploaded content with a rights review and subject heading. I added a link in here to Terry Hine. This is Chrissy Hine's brother. So if you're looking for something fun to watch later, I definitely recommend that. And with that, I will turn it over to Bryan to talk a little bit more about the process.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd talk a little about the process that I went through, and then a few of the challenges that I ran into. My really complicated process was basically just to listen to the interviews in their entirety. Probably, like Jenny said, it was between 90 and 100. I did skip ahead in a few instances, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But I didn't feel like I could maintain accuracy with metadata while skipping ahead. And so I just sort of listened to everything. So we used a Google Docs spreadsheet to record all of this with the headings that were based on Dublin Core, but I know Ginny modified them some. The two I specifically wanted just to talk about were the time periods discussed and then the subjects. So as you can see, for time periods discussed, we use decades. But I did not assume or kind of guess at anything. So if somebody mentioned a specific year, I would record that, or if they mentioned an event that I could date, so like World War II for the 1940s. But a lot of the interviews, they were very vague about what time frame things were occurring in. And there were definitely times when I thought, I'm pretty sure this person is talking about the 50s. Or the 1960s or whatever, but if I did not know, then I did not record it because I didn't want to assume anything. As far as the subjects go, initially, I think we wanted to keep it low, like maybe 5 per interview, something around that. But right away, I sort of came to the realization that that wasn't going to be feasible for a lot of these because the interview subjects, they were in their 60s or 70s. These are hour-long interviews. They're talking about their entire lives. So they just cover a lot of ground with these interviews. And I didn't want to be an arbiter who said, like, okay, these 5 things are important and everything else isn't. And so kind of my rule of thumb was that if they talked about something substantively and for a decent amount of time, then I would record that. If they just talked about something in passing, then I wouldn't. And I tried to approach it sort of from the perspective of, would a researcher find this worthwhile if they're researching this topic? Or would it be a waste of their time to listen to an hour-long interview to get 1 minute on the subject? And I didn't want to mislead them that way. Could we jump to the next slide, please? And then just a few of the challenges. The first was really the grind of doing this, listening to so many interviews over and over again. So I rarely listen to more than 2 or 3 hours in a day. And I don't think I ever went over maybe 8 or 9 hours in a week. And fortunately, I had the entire summer to get through all of these. So I had the time to do that. but it kind of kept me fresh, kept this from feeling like a chore. The second was my failure to use Library of Congress subjects right from the start. When I began, I didn't have a process in place. So I was just kind of recording whatever I thought this seems like a good subject title for this. As the project went along, I started using more LC subjects, but when I got to the end of the project, I ended up having to go through the entire spreadsheet and replace all of my subjects with appropriate matching Library of Congress ones. And that took an entire day. It was like 6 or 7 hours of work. And so if there is one thing I would change about what I did, it would be that. Use LC subjects right from the start. And then for me personally, the biggest challenge was dealing with the May 4th shootings, because this is Kent, so everybody talks about it. Everyone has an opinion about it. I would estimate 90% of the interviews were folks from the town side of the town and gown divide. And almost universally, they blame the students for the shootings. I don't think a single one blamed the National Guard. The overall tenor was resentment towards the students, was they sort of brought this on themselves, and they were the cause of it. And I remember the first one I heard, which was maybe the second or third interview, I went to Ginny and I just sort of said in passing, like, oh God, what this guy just said, it was awful. And then it was almost every interview after that was the same thing. And so that kind of became soul killing to like, oh, you're really dreading the point when it gets to the May 4th shooting. And so when I said I would occasionally skip ahead, like this was where eventually I got to sort of later in the project, that once they'd mentioned May 4th, I'd either skip ahead or I'd take my headphones off, and I was usually multitasking, and I'd just sort of check in to see, have they moved on to a new subject? Because psychologically, I just sort of couldn't handle listening to somebody blame students for being shot, like again. But I felt okay with the skipping ahead just because all I was doing was recording the metadata. It didn't really matter what they were saying about May 4th. It just mattered. All I had to record was that May 4th was being discussed. And so at that point, sort of my job with that was done and I could move ahead. But I also think this is sort of a worthwhile lesson for me, and just sort of one of the challenges, one of the things that's going to come up when you deal with controversial subjects, especially collecting metadata like this, is it might be dealing with things that you're sort of uncomfortable with having to go through so many times. And that's what I have.
All right, and just a quick wrap up. I know I'll try and be quick because I know we've got 2 more. We're looking to complete remaining transcriptions for this project. Hopefully incorporate this into the Mapping May 4 project, which if you haven't seen yet, I included a link. It's pretty cool. And of course, continuing to add new stuff. So thank you so much today for having us. Thank you for LSTA for the funds. Thank you, Bryan. He came in mid-project and really saved us. So huge thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for so candidly sharing your experience going through those recordings, Bryan, and the experience of what that's really like. All sorts of facets to creating metadata in various media formats. So thank you. We are going to go ahead and we do have a question actually. Did you run into many damaged audio files? Great question, Mary.
We did, yeah. There were a few I had to, so by the time I started on the project, most of the reel-to-reel and the audio cassettes had been digitized to CDs, so I was ripping files. So we did have a handful of bad CDs that we had to go back and redigitize the original content. Great question.
Yeah, and I'll just say there was one that was really disappointing that it was completely you could understand the interviewer asking questions, you could not understand the interviewee. And it was about Italian American immigration was the focus of it. And that was really disappointing simply because I think that's something that's a subject that somebody would actually research. And there was just no way to get anything from that hour-long interview. And so that was that was the most disappointing. We had a few of them that were like that, but that was one that really stuck out.
It is so hard to not be able to save it all, isn't it? It sounds like Mary said that they have an oral history project on cassettes for Geauga County. So greatly appreciates hearing from the work that you're doing. And Mary, maybe we can hear about that project at our next ODNFest. So we're going to go ahead and thank you for that great question. We're going to go ahead and move on to Jane Wildermuth at Wright State University, who's going to be talking about a really great collection that they did through their Metadata Mini-Grant project. Can you share, Jane, or are we going to do, Evan, I think, has the slides pulled up for you.
Okay, that's fine.
We'll get there one way or the other.
Yeah, if Evan, you're gonna go ahead and do it?
Sure, I can give it a whirl. Here we go.
Thanks, Evan.
No
Great,
problem.
thank you.
Let's see. Now I have to do it. Share screen. I have to figure out. Now I have to figure
Now
out.
the pressure is on
Well,
you.
it's like, did I update my Zoom? I don't know. Here we go.
All right.
All right. Slideshow from beginning.
Yes.
All right. I think you're good.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. Well, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about our Wright Brothers photograph collection and the Metadata Mini-Grant. I'm Jane Wildermuth. If you don't know me, nice to see you all. I'm the head of special collections and archives here at Wright State University. And we have been trying to get the Wright Brothers photographs into the DPLA probably for, oh my gosh, it's probably been 8 years that we've talked about it, if that's possible. I don't even know. I feel like I went to the very first meetings, like when they were just starting to talk about, getting any Ohio collections into the DPLA. And we just never had the staffing, or the timing was just not right to get this going. And when I saw the mini grants get launched, I thought, finally, this is the time. And we lucked out, kind of. One of our metadata librarians had recently resigned, so it was very easy to find a contractor to do the work for us, because you might remember him, Andrew Harris. He knew the product that we were working in. He was very familiar with the collection. So it was, very easy for us to have him step right back in. He didn't have to learn anything or be trained. He was just ready to get going from day one. You could go to the next slide. Or can I do that? No. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the Wright Brothers collection is a huge collection here at Wright State. We hold the largest Wright Brothers collection in the world. It contains newspapers that the Wright Brothers edited, diaries of their fathers, and thousands of photographs that document the history of flight, but also the family of the Wrights. You could find in there, photographs from their homecoming celebration that they held in 1909, European flights. After they invented flight, they went to Italy and Germany and Spain and showed off their new flying machine. They also started a flying school here in Dayton and trained other people to learn how to be pilots. So it's a great collection. And, we had 2,500 or so photographs already in our repository, but it wasn't in great shape. The metadata needed some tweaking, and we weren't really up to snuff in the requirements in terms of the right statements for the DPLA. So if you go to the next slide. So we started with tackling the right statements. We really thought this was going to be tough. We thought that was going to be the majority of the project, but as we dug into the collection, we quickly realized that most of the material was in the United States and it was out of copyright. So it was pretty easy. We already had a field in there that had the longitude and latitude, so we were able to put everything that was in the United States, all together. And then we had, the date field, of course. So we were able to apply, out of copyright in the United States pretty quickly to a great majority of the photos. There were some more recent photographs that we were we determined that we're in copyright, that we're in the United States. We applied that. The hard ones were the ones, again, from the foreign countries, because a lot of times we weren't sure if it was that the Wrights brought a photographer with them, or if it was the Wright brothers themselves taking these photographs, or if it was, somebody in Italy, Spain, Europe, so we put copyright undetermined, but that part of the project moved pretty quickly. So that was great. Go ahead to the next. Another part of our project, like I said, our metadata was not in great shape. That was especially so for our keywords. We started working on the Wright brothers collection, digitizing it back in 2002. And I think, we were just doing it kind of on the fly, oh, I have a few minutes. I think I'll go write some metadata, And we had student workers helping, and we had, everybody and anybody was in there and really not following any great standards or anything. So we decided to really kind of take a hard look at the keywords for this collection. We started by running a script using Python and just pulled down all the keywords and did a count of how many times we used what keyword. That helped us also to identify typos, or like sometimes somebody had an issue where they kept on reversing Orville and Wilbur's life dates. So finding all the Wilbur and Orville mix-ups. And so that was super helpful. And then we moved on to using OpenRefine to reconcile, to see if we had correct library subject name authority and subject headings. We noticed that early on, and I think it was probably the student workers, were just using freehand subject heading, freehand subjects, and not looking up subject headings to find the appropriate thing. So it was good to kind of use this OpenRefine tool to help us reconcile that. You could go to the next slide. From that, we've created a data dictionary of all the keywords that we use, and they're identified as whether they're local keywords or if they're Library of Congress. We plan to use that same data dictionary to apply to other parts of the collection that are in our repository and eventually will go into the DPLA. So like the Wright brothers edited newspapers, a family album, and the Wright brothers father's diaries are all in the repository, and the same keywords can be applied. And that will be super helpful to help with our searching. Next slide. We also added a new field for spatial coverage. Ours was just by latitude and longitude, and in the DPLA, the natural language is also used. So we added a natural language field so that it was easier to, nobody's going to be able to be like, oh, 39.75, whatever is, of course, Dayton, Ohio. So I'm going to click on that. This allowed it so people can click on the various names of the cities and towns and, get results back for those specific locations. And then the last slide. Of course, by adding it to the DPLA, we've seen improvements in our searching and, of course, access. There's lots of Wright brothers materials already in the DPLA, but we've certainly added to it. And I think anybody who's researching them now has a much better picture of all the materials that are available for the Wrights. It also you could tell these are the two search results. So for our repository that's there, where it's just a laundry list. So I did a search of portraits of Wilbur, and that's what I get in our repository. But if I do the same search in the DPLA, I get a much more robust and easier to use search back. The thumbnails are going to be great, as you can only imagine. There's only so many portraits of Orville that you can guess what it might be behind it, but having the actual thumbs is going to be super helpful to our researchers and to us when people contact us and, I would like one with him wearing a bowler hat. I would like him, so this has been great. I think that about wraps it up. Thanks again to the State Library for providing, the funds to get this project done. It's really great. And I think we could certainly see in the future adding more to the DPLA.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. And the thumbnails are great. We all just instinctually, as visual creatures, you know, are attached to photos instantly. And it's also great to hear your experience with the Wright statements from the other direction, where you were expecting it to be more challenging, and then you found out that it was a little bit more streamlined than you thought it would be. So it's great to see. We don't want anybody to have troubles, but we're here to support them. But it's interesting to see that it can go both ways for sure. So I don't know if we have any questions coming into the chat, but while we're waiting on that, we are going to go ahead and end at 3:15 as planned, and give us a break time before we come back for our final session of the day. Quick 30-minute update to the work that ODN staff have been doing in 2021. I almost said 2020, 2021. Luckily, I'm not writing any checks lately. And we do, again, want to thank everybody who participated in this Metadata Mini-Grant project and program. We were just getting this off the ground. This was our first iteration of this, and it was really wonderful to be able to see the projects that came to light. I was so excited to hear from everybody today, and we're happy to be able to keep doing that program. As I said, we just started a second one, and we're hopefully planning to be able to continue it. So if you've seen something here, even if you've already applied for one and you're inspired by something, or you think that you know somebody in your community that you'd like to partner with that would be a good fit for this, certainly keep an eye out, reach out to us with questions. It's open to any sorts of cultural heritage institutions, you know, that are working with libraries and able to put their content into DPLA. So you don't have to be a public library or an academic library or anything like that. As long as we can get it into DPLA, that's the goal, right? So once again, thank you so much to all our speakers today. And thank you so much, especially for rolling with the technical punches, as it were. Flexibility certainly is key these days. So we will be back here for 3:30, and we will have our ODN annual report update, and we'll see you then. Thank you, everybody.